and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are tuning in from. We're so excited for you to join us today. My name is Jessica Chung. I'm an admissions officer at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. We're super excited to share a little bit about life at the GSB and beyond with you all today. So here's what today's event is going to include. I'm going to give a brief introduction to our global community, and then I'm going to introduce our panelists, or rather our panelists are going to introduce themselves. We're going to have a couple of prepared questions to get warmed up, and then finally, we're going to spend most of our time looking at your questions. So again, please use that Q&A box, and you can also upvote any questions that other attendees have submitted that you would like to know the answers to. Altogether, we're going to spend about 55 minutes together, and hopefully we're going to get as many of your questions answered as possible. So first, to give a little bit of an overview of our community, as I mentioned, we have a truly global community on our campus. For example, the class of 2021 that is graduating this year includes 43% international students. We have 66 countries represented in that community and 70 languages spoken in that class of 2021. In addition, our community includes many different clubs and organizations supporting the incredible diversity of our community. Clubs like the Africa Business Club, the Asian Business Student Association, the Business in India Club, the Greater China Business Club, the Student Association International Committee. We have many, many different ways that students can get involved and that students can support one another and have an impact on our community and beyond. I'm really excited to be joined by a number of panelists, including current students and alumni. My apologies to Vincent. Let me see if I can, okay, I wonder if I can fix this, but why don't, Julia, if you could go ahead and get us started and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and a little bit about what brought you to the GSB.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia. I'm originally from Seoul, South Korea, but I grew up moving between Korea and America. So I went to college in Duke. I decided to come to the GSB and I guess pursue an MBA degree mainly because I wanted to seek two things. One, a career pivot, and two, a network of, I guess, individuals who are passionate about making a difference in the world. And there certainly has been a lot of both in the past year alone. I think I'm the only current student on the panel today and very excited to be here.
Awesome, thank you. Leo, hi, how are you?
Hey, nice to meet you all. I'm Leo. I used to be a military man before I joined the GSB. Used to be a lieutenant in the Korean Air Force. Grew up in Seoul the whole time. I went to all my schools here before the GSB. After 2 years there, I started working as an investment banker in New York, and right now I'm back in Korea working in private equity. Yep, happy to talk about transitioning from non-traditional backgrounds to the post-MBA careers that look more traditional, plus adjusting to first time ever studies in New York, in Stanford, in the US.
Awesome, thank you. Rich, do you want to speak next?
Sure. Hey guys, Rich here. I'm originally from the Philippines. I went to the GSB class of 2020. Prior to that, I was doing a mix of education and finance. I did investment banking and equity research for about 5-6 years. I was also a part-time university lecturer. Then I went to the GSB, and now I run an edtech fintech startup based in Singapore with operations in the Philippines and Indonesia. It's called Derudify. Nice to meet you all.
Awesome, thank you. Saswati?
Hey, hi everybody. I'm Saswati. You can call me Sash. I spent most of my time pre-GSB working at Unilever, so worked in the CPG industry in India. Pivoted to venture investing post the GSB. Have been running for the past year, have been running a venture studio in India called Meraki Labs. yeah, happy to chat about career pivots and how you think about just careers outside the US. Happy to talk about that.
Awesome, thank you. Finally, Vincent.
Hey everyone, my name is Vince, joining everyone from Palo Alto. 5 a.m. here, but very, very happy to be here. I graduated with Sash and Rich in the class of 2020. Prior to business school, I was at Bain & Company, and I rejoined my firm, but transferred from the Singapore to the San Francisco office. So I guess the perspective I can offer is not a career pivot, but staying within your industry, but transferring countries.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us at 5 a.m. I know that it's kind of a brutal hour, but we're really grateful to have all of you here. So I'll begin with a question that I think Julia spoke to a little bit already, but I'm curious about why an MBA, and especially why a Stanford MBA. So what was it that made you decide to pursue another degree rather than continuing to work? And what was it about Stanford in particular?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was sort of similar to what Julia said as well. I had worked for 5 years in CPG in India, and I sort of was looking at exploring something in the startup ecosystem in India. So some questions that were already in my mind is what sort of roles, what sort of domains, etc. And something that I felt that I was ill-equipped in terms of skills, in terms of my mindset, etc. That I needed guidance, and I needed something that would sort of augment my skills in a way. So decided to take the plunge and take a break in my career so that I could get that time to sort of figure out what I want to do next. And GSB was a good filler in that sense, that it gave me, obviously, got to meet a bunch of people, got a lot of more context, and helped me think through my career decisions. Specifically why GSB, I think I've always had this fascination that I definitely wanted to go to the US, study abroad, have an MBA from abroad. I think what appealed specifically for the GSB was its strong, I would say, geographical location, and not just from the good weather perspective, but also the fact that it's in the Bay Area and obviously heavily influenced by the entrepreneurial culture. So given that that's where I was leaning towards, it made a logical choice.
Awesome, thank you for sharing that. Anybody else want to chime in about why an MBA and why Stanford?
I can go. So for me, I didn't really get the chance to study overseas, and it was always really part of my bucket list to take a degree abroad. And so, like, broadly, that's what the why MBA. I know it's not like the very complex reason that people expect, but that was my main reason. And then why GSB? I chose it versus the other programs I got into because it really focused on soft skills. Coming from management consulting, I really wasn't looking for, the content of business school per se. I wasn't looking to learn financial modeling and whatnot because I had already had experience in that. And so I wanted a school that emphasized things like leadership, things like being vulnerable, and actually, teach you how to potentially fire an employee. Like, that's probably not a best example, but or teach you how to have a feedback conversation with a supervisee. And the GSB's pedagogy and emphasis on role plays and whatnot allowed for that unique experience relative to the other programs.
Absolutely, thank you for sharing that. So I'm also curious about sort of obviously this event is all about your journey from wherever you're from to the GSB. How did you, I guess, was there anything that surprised you about the GSB? Were there any like rumors or myths that you had heard about the GSB prior to arriving? And then in what ways did your experience sort of dispel those myths? or anything that surprised you about your experience?
I can give it a go. So prior to entering the GSBs, and you know, if you look at sort of just business school forums and all these statistics, right? So in your head, you sort of overplay the GSB as sort of a place where these brilliant, amazing people, you know, all a bunch up together in a singular place. And so for me coming into the GSB, I was pretty overwhelmed with how much I had to sort of step up just to sort of fit in a community of a lot of overachievers. And when I got to the GSB, what really surprised me and what stood out to me was just how welcoming everyone is, how unintimidating the environment is, how friendly it is. And you know, it's actually a very, very safe space to just be yourself. And I think allowing myself to just and have a great time without having to like put up a face, I think that was, I think, a very, very pleasant surprise during my 2 years there.
Awesome, thank you.
I think for me, there are two things. I think the first is that the GSB has a reputation for, I guess, really encouraging startups and entrepreneurship. And that has been very true. And I think that was almost surprising to the extent to which it was true, especially as a current student. I can attest that so many of my conversations involve me like brainstorming with my friends on different startup ideas that we should be pursuing. But I guess on the flip side of that, there is still a significant number of classmates who are interested in traditional industries like consulting or banking. And I think that is kind of a myth that the GSB does have, that that students who come here are only pursuing, let's say, a VC or entrepreneurship, because I don't think that's the case. I think there are definitely a healthy number of people who are pursuing more professional career tracks. And I think because there are a lot of students who come into the program with previous experience in those fields, it's made for a very fostering environment for people who are interested in going towards those industries.
Kind of piggybacking on that, my 2 cents on that aspect of the traditional industry in Stanford, I think is, yes, one, I was also surprised at how everybody really is worshiping early stage and venture capital and startups, but also Stanford is actually, well, we're not known for example, a finance school, but in terms of the entrance profile of the people coming in, it is the school that has the highest percentage of students who've been in private equity or consulting, for example. So when I was preparing to actually go to one of those industries, my classmates are really helpful. And for people who are pivoting from non-traditional industries to those that are traditional, I think the class profile actually helps out in many ways. And to me also, what also surprised me when I first entered was, I think this was also mentioned, but how comfortable the setting was, how inclusive it was in mingling with people who are the most overachieving individuals in their each sector. I mean, one day I went the day that I went to my first class, I sat next to a classmate named Jessica. I said, "Hey, what did you do before the GSB?" She said, I used to be an athlete. I used to do something with water polo." And I said, "Hey, I'm from the military. I haven't taken any accounting or finance. I know nothing about business. We're kind of similar." I go home, I look her up on the internet, and I found out she has 4 golden medals from the Olympics. And I dare said that we're similar. But this seating of 400 people from each of their industries who've definitely overachieved, and you're sitting aside them, right next to them in classes, discussing problems, sharing ideas, and then one day you find out you are one of them. And I think I remember one really big lesson from the first day of GSB when Derek Bolton in CIMEX in a huge auditorium would say, "One thing I want to tell you for the last time and first time is that we do not make mistakes." And at that time I thought, oh, maybe I'm a mistake, but I think everybody's thinking the same thing when these overachievers are gathering together from across the globe, and actually we're learning a ton from each other. And the setting for that, Stanford does an amazing job at it.
Awesome, thank you for that. And I will say that, you know, as an admissions officer, it's really true. We're perfect. We make no mistakes. So, I mean, I think we're very grateful for the community that we get to build as well, and see you all thriving. Yeah, we feel very grateful. I'm also wondering, I guess, what were some of the most transformative or meaningful or helpful experiences that you had on campus, whether that's being a part of a particular community or certain resources or opportunities? What were some of the things that were most transformative, meaningful, or helpful in your experience?
I can chime in. I think I think career-wise, what I got most from the GSB, apart from, you know, a great network of people, is actually the career coaching that the Career Center gave me. So despite going back to management consulting, at the GSB, I was able to explore professional passions I didn't know I had. And these passions are like considered, I guess, a bit more non-conventional, because after consulting, I intend to exit to either two industries. One is video games, and two is theme parks. And it was the career coaches at the GSB that brought those things out of me. I actually only recruited for video game companies for my summer internship, and that's where I discovered that, hey, like, this is something I really want to do once I finish my consulting sponsorship. Theme parks wasn't an option for visa reasons, but soon it will be. And so I'm excited for that. And I would not have arrived at that conclusion without the GSB's career office. Also, one thing to plug is that my significant other is still an MBA. So we've been together 7 years, and my boyfriend I just co-hosted a theme parks brown bag lunch with my boyfriend, with like some executives from Universal Studios. So, you know, like, I guess it's one way to say that the GSB community still sticks with you after business school and after graduating.
I can go next. So I think for me, one of the most memorable experiences at the GSB was leading a global study trip to India. So this is, just for context, it's basically a trip that about 20 to 30 MBA ones go on, and the trip is led by 4 to 5 MBA twos. So me and 4 of my classmates, we put this entire trip together, and it was memorable for a couple of reasons. One, it was an opportunity to show people who have never visited India what, you know, business in India looks like, what are challenges, just getting to understand more from a roots level. And I think the other thing was, you just get to meet another set of 30 amazing folks who you might not have crossed paths with otherwise. So yeah, I think those 7 days were some of the best discussions I've had, some of the best experiences we've had together, both professionally as well as cultural experiences. So yeah, so I think the highlight for me was that one trip that I took to India.
I can go. My favorite experience so far, only halfway through, can't believe it's going by so quickly, was the Lean Launchpad class. I don't think I had the courage to, I guess, pursue an idea by myself without that structured curriculum. And so I guess that opportunity to do an action learning class, as stereotypical as it sounds, was really valuable in opening my eyes to how much fun I could have working on a startup from ground zero. And so would highly recommend any and all of you to try it out if you get to come to the GSB, even if you don't think that startup is a path that you're potentially interested in pursuing on the long term.
I also have an experience that I do wish that any and all of you really tries out. It's called the GSB Show. It's a student-led musical. that over 150 to 200 people participate every year. It's actually more attended than the graduation ceremony. So you see how important it is. Students and professors and significant others, and sometimes just other members of the campus to participate to create a musical comedy around, I think it was around 2 hours. And we actually rent out a theater to put the show on. And the writers who are also students would put all the existing inside jokes of that year into that show. And singers will be students, dancers will be students, etc. And to me, I was the dance director for the show of 2017 and 2018. And it was an unforgettable experience, having 100 to 200 people dance together. And you know what's interesting about this show is that I know all of you have your talents too that are not career related and that could be put on a stage. People know that this is one of their last chances to really fire it up. and the level of passion that comes from that opportunistic mindset is incredible. You can look up the show online, and if you look up business school shows, you'll see other Foleys from our competitive institutions on the East Coast, etc. And one way to gauge which school is the right fit for you is to find out which one's the most funny and interesting.
Great advice. So you might not have any gold medals, but you can dance, is what I'm hearing so far. Awesome. Thank you all for that. So I'm going to turn now to our Q&A box, and to our attendees, thank you for submitting some really, really thoughtful questions, and please continue to submit your questions and upvote questions that you're interested in hearing the answers to. I'm going to sort of combine and rephrase some of these questions because I think there are some overlapping themes. Some of our attendees are wondering what sort of going back in time, what are some tips that you have? So what advice would you give to yourself as an applicant, and what tips do you have for future applicants such as our attendees here?
I can take it. Then everyone can build on it, I guess. I think I wouldn't say so. Obviously, admissions is a black box, and maybe Will and Jessica can shed some light into that. Like, I don't know why I got in, but I think this is a bit like my genuine advice is just to be authentic in your application, right? Like, the essay question is, I'm not sure if it's still the same, but it's what matters most to you and why. And some people tend to over-engineer their answers, or some people think that there is a standard answer that will get you accepted. The reality is there's not, and there's probably one answer, like a different answer for every single person here. And so I think that what got me in was being true to myself and authenticity, and like just writing what I felt like writing about. One thing I heard prior to applying was your essay has to ooze passion, right? And I was lucky enough that I was passionate enough about gay rights in Southeast Asia, and so I wrote about that. And I knew that was, and I guess it was a passionate reason to get in, and so that was my thing.
Just to add to Vince's a little bit, I guess for me, it's not to never forget that there are two parts to that essay question. It's sort of the what and the why. And I think being able to like flesh out both, I think is pretty important. And most people do forget the latter part and how to dig deep into like your core and actually try to find out, what makes you be who you are. And I think that's pretty important to like go through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both of those pieces of advice are really, really apt. I know I'm the admissions specialist on the panel, but both of those, I think both pieces of advice are really, really apt. I think it's so important to reflect before starting the application or before submitting your application. It is really about authenticity, about sharing what drives you. So we're interested not just in what you've accomplished, but also like what has driven you, what has motivated those accomplishments, what are you passionate about? So I think, Vince, your advice is really, really apt. And I often hear from students that sort of the first step in the application process is taking that step back and really reflecting on what matters to you most and why. What do you want to use this opportunity for? And then sort of using the application as a tool to drive reflection. And Rich, I think your advice is also really, really accurate, to dig past the surface level as you're responding to our questions and as you're writing the application. We're interested not just in what you've accomplished, but how have you accomplished it? How have you led people? How have you exhibited strategic thinking? How have you seen beyond what's in front of you? How have you performed beyond what's expected of you? How have you mobilized and influenced other people? How have you gotten other people to support your ideas and your solutions? How have you supported other people? And how have you cultivated a team or mentored others? Those are all the things that we're interested in, or many of the things that we're interested in. So we're interested not just in what you've accomplished, but how you've accomplished it, how you've demonstrated leadership, how you've had an impact. And then I think, of course, we're interested not just in what matters to you, but why does it matter to you? So I think as much as you can think about everything a step deeper, I think that will benefit you in the application process. So that was a great question and great answers from our panelists as well. There's a great question from Minnie about your experiences at the GSB. And Minnie asks, how did you expand your network and experience in your respective industries while you were at the GSB? And what resources did you find most useful through the program?
So I think I'll answer from the perspective of somebody who's changed industries. I think some of the best resources that you have on campus in terms of developing a context about industries or sort of building those relationships with people in the industry is through the many industry clubs that we have at Stanford. Most of the clubs are student run, and these are folks who have either worked in that industry or are themselves switching into that industry. So it gives you a lot of perspective. The club obviously becomes a microcosm of people who are interested in similar activities, similar sort of ideas that maybe you might be interested in. So I would say that's one very good resource that you should definitely check out at the GSB.
Yeah, just to add upon that, totally echo the sentiments around your classmates and the GSB network being the most valuable primary source of expanding your network. And then I would say the faculty here, both the professors and the lecturers alike, are extremely well connected. We would just be like, oh, I like to talk to someone in this industry. And they're like, oh, I know the CEO of this company and that company. And they would just connect you. And it's just magical what the GSB network can, I guess, open doors to. And I'd also say a lot of my friends here have also had success with cold emails, because I think a lot of people are genuinely interested in speaking to GSB students who have something interesting to say about the industry that they're in. And so I've also had success reaching out to, both alumni and people who have no immediate connection to the GSB and getting them to agree to a quick 20-minute call. And so I think it's all about how intentional and proactive you are about being, exchanging value in your networking.
I want to give an example to both those points on the email address and the power of the network. As I mentioned a while ago, I was interested in video games, which is not a very conventional industry to exit to. And it was and for one, like when I was in my second year, I was president of the video game club. While president of the video game club, we did the first inaugural video game career track at the GSB. And surprisingly enough, like with the Stanford email address, maybe 80% of the companies we reached out to actually replied within like a few days and volunteered themselves as stops for this video game career track. So we were able to visit cool companies like Roblox, Twitch, EA Games. There was even a video game VC fund that came to campus to present. And so I guess that's a testament to the power of the email address. Second is, again, on video games, the network internally is really strong. A couple of my classmates were part of the video game industry prior to entering, so that made networking with the larger companies easier. And also there's just people pursuing the same interests as you. There were 5 of us who were members of the executive team at the video game club. And you know, one of them like records piano music on Spotify and has millions of views. just like playing video game piano music on Spotify. And so like that's just an interesting narrative and, you know, a proof point for like just the varying range of interests across the GSP.
I think we can put it this way, where whatever your short-term goal is, there's somebody in the classroom who's done it. Been there, done that. And there's also somebody else in the classroom who has the same goal as you. And then there's somebody in the alumni network and outside of the alumni network who are waiting for you, really hands open, arms open, to help out as needed, because they have received that help and they want to pay for it too. So there's just, you're surrounded by people who will push you and pull you and accompany you through whatever journey you're trying to take. So I think resources and networking connections was the last thing I had to worry about when I was in Stanford. I think I worry more about it after I graduated.
And just to close the loop on this, 2 things, right? One, I think, is your network does extend even beyond the US. Like I personally wanted to go back to Asia all the time, and I think that GSP name does carry over across borders. And I do think your problem isn't about how to network; it's about focusing your where you network, because you only have 2 years at the GSB. So it's really more about like knowing who you want to talk to, where you want to be, and just going for that.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. And we have a couple questions too about sort of pivoting. And I love how all of your answers sort of touched on how you can really leverage the community to pivot industries if that's what you want to do. So there are a couple questions about pivoting industries. So if any of you have anything you want to add about career pivots, please feel free to chime in. There is one question in particular for, one question in particular for Leo about coming from sort of a non-traditional military background. So if you could shed some light on that transition, I think that would be really, really awesome. And then if anybody else wants to chime in about pivoting, that would be really welcome as well.
Sure, I'd love to share. Let me try to go as briefly as possible. It's a long story, why I wanted to and how it happened. So I come from a non-traditional background in that it was a military, plus that I majored in French literature in undergrad and never took a course in business, accounting, or finance or whatever. I originally wanted to work for a nonprofit organization. I interned at UNESCO in Paris and working on things like art preservation, language preservations. Those things were my thing back when I was in college. And then in 2012, when I was an intern there, due to some political circumstances, United States and some other countries stopped funding the organization, and all the budgets for the little, small, beautiful projects that I loved started getting cut. And that's when I first thought, ooh, money is important. well, put in another way, it would be great if I could be working in a role where I get to impact the flow of funds going to people or organizations or businesses that matter, is my normal interview answer. But then I went to the military. I was spending 3.5 years there as a full-time officer because it's one of the things when Korean men do when they don't know what to do with their career. During my second to third year, I found out that there are industries called investment banking or private equity, or also maybe management consulting, which are all traditional post-MBA careers that may get me closer to my goals, and started preparing. When I first came to school, I found out that all of my classmates have already done investment banking and private equity. And they were my core resources in preparing. And one thing people misunderstand about Stanford campus is that not a lot of people end up going to banking. It's not because people are not interested in finance or people are less trained in finance. It's just that they've already done it before. And I did, I think, around 30 to 40 mock interviews with my classmates in my section and served them for a Korean food night, soju night, and then we were all good on that. I did have to network flying from the East and West Coast during Thanksgiving, etc., to meet the recruiters, bulge bracket banks at that time, to actually get into the process, and ended up interviewing with all the companies. Got an offer in San Francisco and New York. I thought it would be great to start a finance career in New York. And then I did have to come back to Korea because I went to Stanford on a Fulbright scholarship, which requires 2 years of home country residency. Throughout all that process, I think for every single pivot or every single way to the next step, Stanford community was the core in facilitating, because I started my career in Bank of America after GSB, and that was through campus recruiting. When I moved from Bank of America to cross-border private equity in Korea, it was also through introductions into Stanford Alumni Network. And once I had a trip to Hong Kong meeting 10 to 15 private equity companies that I thought would be worth discussing with, and they were every single one of them were former bosses of my classmates. So I think all these structured recruiting processes for consulting or banking or the more traditional post-MBA careers are well structured enough in a way that if you go to school and prepare and have your friends help out, it works out, because these traditional MBA careers are traditional, so-called traditional, because they take people who pivot.
Just to add to that, I think mine was probably an example of something that was very unstructured. So, typically, early stage investing is based on networking. So whether you are looking to transition into early stage investing in the US or anywhere across the world, it's a very network driven industry to begin with. So I think that's where I sort of echo what Leo was just mentioning, that the strength of the community within the GSB and the alumni really, really helps. It just interacting with a lot of the classmates who had spent a lot of time in VCs, who had spent a lot of time investing, just to understand, how they do it, just picking their brain and just getting a lot. And the best part is people are always happy to help you, and you will never feel like you should never hesitate for help. They're always super helpful to sort of just sit down with you and explain you certain things if you are very unfamiliar with it. So definitely, I think got a lot of help in terms of identifying who I should talk to. For me, I was very clear that I was definitely coming back to India right after graduation. And with that perspective, even during my summers when I was trying to figure out how do I break into the VC ecosystem in India, I got a bunch of leads, got really good advice on how to sort of make that transition, how to think, how to sort of carry myself in that career. So yeah, completely echo that, people are the strength of the GSB, and you you can really leverage them as much as you can.
So thank you both for those insights. There are a couple questions about classes at the GSB. Some folks are wondering what were some of your favorite or most memorable classes. There's one question for Julia in particular about entrepreneurship classes. So maybe Julia, if you can start there, and then if anybody else has any experiences with classes that they'd like to share, please feel free to chime in after.
Definitely. Yeah, in addition to Lean Launchpad, there's so many different startup classes here at the GSB. It seems like new ones are popping up left and right. There's the Startup Garage, which is obviously also very famous. And then there's Launchpad at the design school. And there's climate ventures programs, and there's designing for extreme affordability. And there's so many different types of entrepreneurship classes that you can take. And so I guess in addition to classes that help you, I guess, incubate your own idea, I also enjoy taking formation of impact ventures, because social ventures is also a space that interests me a lot. And it's basically like a case study class where you go through, let's say, a dozen or so social ventures over the course of the quarter. And so, yeah, I would say it really depends on what type of knowledge you're seeking, but there has been a variety of courses that I've been able to take even as an MBA 1. I would just close out with saying that I think the learning also comes from outside of the classroom. And so it's not just about the course that you're taking, but again, so many of your classmates have so much experience in anything and everything that you could have questions about. And so just having that really great advisory board living on campus with you has been really helpful.
Awesome, thank you. Any other favorite classes that people are reflecting on?
I like strategic communication and winning writing. These are, I think, two of my favorite comms-based classes, which I think helps really sharpen, like, let's say, the more intangible skills of yourself. In the first class, you basically have to give a speech in front of class. I think it's once a week, and then you watch a video of yourself, and then you critique yourself. Not very fun, but I think it is very, very, very helpful in seeing how you come across to other people. And I think that's something, GSB is a very, very safe space to practice these skills, and I think it's really a fantastic platform.
I mentioned something a while ago on the emphasis on soft skills. I want to give examples of that. One of the most impactful classes I took at the GSB was Touchy-Feely, or formerly known as interpersonal dynamics, which is basically like the setup is we were trapped in a room for 4 hours once a week with 11 other people, and all we did were exercises in which we just gave very straight up feedback to each other. And there was emphasis on, being vulnerable and authentic and just being honest with people. And in that setting, I was able to communicate really, things I would be uncomfortable communicating outside of that context, outside of that safe space. Touching on topics such as race, such as, how one, how some person phrased the sentence was a bit offensive to some other people, witnessing that and seeing my blind spots. That was really impactful to me. And I think the language and the parlance that course taught me, are lessons that I still bring and I still use to this day, even in the professional context, especially when you're having a feedback chat with your supervisee at work. Super impactful. Other classes you can look at are Leadership Labs and Art of Self-Coaching. Those two other classes were also super impactful. I won't go into detail, but they're worth looking up. Really good classes that are structured around paired coaching and role playing. You get a lot from those.
Awesome, thank you. I think you actually answered one of the other questions in the Q&A box about soft skills and how the GSB experience cultivates some of those soft skills. There's another great question in the Q&A box about leadership. So Yukiho asks, how did your leadership change during the 2 years at Stanford? In what way and how? So Vince, you mentioned some of the classes. I'm curious for other folks, how did your leadership change and how did that happen?
So to be very honest, I wouldn't say that it's like a step jump that you can see you're at 0 one day and you're at 1. I think it's a continuous journey. And the point that Vince mentioned about these classes is that it makes you a lot more self-aware. So it's like, I can't say that I am implementing everything that I learned from Touchy Feely very well, but yes, I know that I'm doing much better than I was probably doing 2 years back. So yeah, there are many. So that's just one thing I would sort of caveat the entire answer with, that you shouldn't think of it like, oh, these 2 years, after these 2 years, you'll be able to actually do something very drastically different. But what these courses do is they give you interesting mental models to think about yourself, be aware of what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're behaving with people. And it just helps you set that context for really becoming a good leader in the future. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on this.
Thanks for that insight. That's helpful. So there's a number of questions about life after the GSB as well. And I think a few folks are wondering both about sort of the opportunities within the US. So perhaps Vince, you can speak to that. And other folks are wondering about sort of transitioning back to their home country afterwards. So what were your experiences with that transition to life after the GSB, whether you were looking to return to your home country or to stay in the US?
So I could take the staying in the US. I might not be able to directly answer it because the thing about my scenario was I was pre-committed to transfer from the Singapore to the San Francisco office even before starting at the GSB. Granted, I think one thing I'd like to point out is that for international students, the MBA degree at the GSB has now been accredited as a STEM degree, which means that if you want to stay, you are guaranteed that you're able to work here for at least 3 years post-graduation. And in general, if you're with a credible company within those 3 years, you should be able to either win a lottery, a visa lottery that allow you to stay indefinitely, or you could kickstart or finish a green card process within that time frame. And so, like, that's one of the things that makes the transition easier. And also, I think one thing I realized was the GSB has a disproportionate representation of people that stay in one geography after graduation. I think that 50 to 60% of my classmates are still in the Bay Area working in various industries. And that just, and as someone who literally like packed his bags to move here and didn't know anyone, it's great that the network I actually built while I was at the GSB is still within physical reach. I guess for COVID, that COVID kind of disrupts that a bit because I wasn't able to see any people as much last year, but still, like, having people within arm's reach has been helpful, and being able to eat with people in restaurants readily with like a 30-minute Uber ride.
I'll just add something, I guess just to put things into perspective. It is obviously more challenging to get a job in the US as an international. Like there's no getting by that. It is true. But I guess it's just a comparison of, would it be easier if you hadn't gone to an MBA and hadn't come to the GSB? I would say it's definitely much advantageous to, I guess, apply while you're in school as an MBA candidate. And so it's all about perspective. And I guess if you are committed to staying in the US, you could certainly prioritize employers or types of jobs that give you sponsorship, or pursue an entrepreneurship journey that could give you that status. And so it's about your own priorities. And so nothing is guaranteed, but there is certainly a higher chance of you staying if you choose to pursue that path. And if you want to come back, I'm sure, I guess that's another question that I can address, which is, well, kind of, because I'm not an alumni yet. We speak about how the alumni pool at the GSB might be smaller in some countries, and I think that's probably true. But I think it also speaks to the depth and the strength of the network, because as we've all already touched upon, everyone in the network seems to be super, super eager to help out. And so I think it's a double-edged coin kind of, but it certainly has its advantageous aspects.
Thank you both for those insights. And I see in the chat, Will is also pointing to the Bechdel International Center, which I don't think we've talked about yet. So I am curious about some of your experiences working with the Bechdel International Center and how it supported your transition from Asia to Stanford, as is the title of this event. So any experiences with Bechdel or examples of the support and resources they provide?
I think they're definitely super supportive when it comes to visa stuff. That's all I can say. Like anything you can ask them any question about, the legal things about staying in the US, and they proactively answer. And you can walk there and actually ask them in person pre-pandemic, and they're generally reliable. And they were just a great resource for me as someone who was trying to navigate the US immigration system as an international.
So thank you. So I know we are coming up on time. I want to take one last question, perhaps in a lightning round, if you all are willing to do that. So Ramandeep asks, how do students spend their free time, and how does the GSB encourage long-term relationships between students? Which I love that question. So perhaps in a lightning round, if you could say what was one of your favorite things to do on or around campus? Or what was one way that, what was one of your favorite ways to connect with other people in our community?
I can take a start first. So the first thing, what was one of my most interesting things that I did out of this thing was listening to my classmates talk. So talk is typically a setup where one student goes up and tells their life story. So that was one of the highlights. And the second, what other events were sort of interesting. I loved having small group dinners with smaller groups and sort of get to know people on a more intimate level. So that was my networking method, I would say.
Awesome, thank you.
I used to hang out on Town Square every Thursday evening with a few friends, and the group started snowballing. In the end, I think we had a lot more people than the initial 3 or 4. We would get some mini wine from Coupa Cafe and watch the sunset. That was my weekly pleasure, and something we still do over Zoom if it works out. And Stanford has a beautiful golf course. The course is great, but the driving range is beautiful too. And sometimes we would stop by Coupa and get the same mini wine and go to the driving range, and we would practice, and we would call it drink and drive. I'm getting sad, but yeah, those are beautiful memories that that keep me going when things are hard.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mine was simple. Just go out, take a walk with your classmate, and just get to know them. Where else would you have time to just meet someone with no agenda? No, nothing's rushing you. I think that's a perfect place to do it. Just to like, be human and be vulnerable. So I think it's fantastic to do that.
Yeah, I also echo Leo and Rich's points. One of my favorite things this past quarter was taking the bike out, because Schwab and JMAC lets you rent out bikes for free, and biking to the tennis courts and the golf range. And so I would go to tennis and golf and then bike back with friends. And so that was amazing. And I don't know, our free time, we don't really have a lot of free time because our time is filled up with talking to people, doing things, just hanging out. Like, you have time blocks for hanging out at Manzanita Field, which is a new field that we have next to Schwab. And so it's always a busy time, but it's a great time.
Real quick lightning answer. +1 on Rich for walks. One of my best friends at the GSB, I literally went on a walk with every single week for 2 years, and we still do a call every 2 weeks. And so that just shows you like the level, the deep relationship level that you can form with someone. And then yeah, and then you can literally, the nice thing about the GSB is they give you budget to do any event you want. And so I held a bunch of like Filipino food dinner events. I held board game and ice cream night, and then anyone could just sign up, and that was a great way to meet people and also try the best ice cream in the Bay Area for free. I mean, I guess you paid for it through your tuition, but technically, but yeah, you get it back in a way.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing those really heartfelt stories. I loved hearing them, and I'm sure our attendees did too. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for spending this hour with us. Thank you to our participants for submitting your really thoughtful questions. Please let us know in the poll when you're thinking of joining us. And I'll just throw up one last slide. The journey continues at mystanford.mba. Thank you again to everybody who's participated in this event. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. We hope you've gotten your questions answered. And again, another big shout out to our panelists. We're so grateful to be in community with you all and to have had this opportunity to hear your stories. So thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day or your evening. Take care, everyone.